Hello, my name is Titus Custer, and this is my data science project having everything to do with the Yelp dataset. So let's go ahead and move right in to why I started this project. I took a course on Coursera entitled SQL for Data Science. It was put out by UC Davis. It was an excellent course giving a broad overview of a lot of the principles around using SQL specifically for data science. And so this Yelp project really was made up of two major parts as a result of how the course structured it. The first part was all about profiling the data set, really trying to get an understanding of what the data set is, what it contains, and then part two really focused a lot more about personal inferences and analysis that I do as the data professional. And I do want to mention right off the bat that the structure of the initial questions throughout all of part one and aspects of part two really originate firmly from the course, but in an attempt to try to compile this for a project to be able to display here on my YouTube channel and on my LinkedIn profile and also on my GitHub, which will all be linked in the description below and mentioned at the very end of this presentation. Just wanted to lay out that this is a compilation that I've edited for clarity and concise, pointed presentation purposes. So let's go ahead and jump right into explaining what exactly Yelp is. I think that's a really helpful question to answer while we get into this. So Yelp is a company that was founded in 2004. It's a popular online directory. I really like the way the author describes this. Yelp is just an application with a wide variety of services. It's able to provide users with a way of categorizing and storing public opinion and data about businesses, and it makes it accessible and easy to engage with in their web application and also their iOS and Android smart device application. Listings could be anything from an outdoor seating, a hairdresser, spa, gas station, but it could feature things such as outdoor seating. It could talk about delivery service capability for the business or the ability to accept reservations. There's a lot of information jam-packed about each individual business on this website. But another interesting and important part, not necessarily for the purposes of this data project, but when we're trying to understand what Yelp is it has a strong social aspect. It encourages users to leave these written reviews. It encourages them to pick out of 1 to 5 stars how they would rate this business on overall experience. And then, of course, invites them to share photos of their experiences as well. And this is all just something that Brad Stevenson from LifeWire he put in his article, which you can find here and linked in the description below as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into talking about the data set itself. So this is the ER diagram that the course itself supplied. As you'll notice that there are really 3 tables that are really helpful for our purposes. But I wanted to just display this ER diagram to say there's a lot more that we could have dug into. But these 3 tables help us answer the questions that we focused on specifically for this project. The tables I explored had much more to do with businesses themselves and didn't really focus too much upon usage or activity of the users themselves. Star ratings were, of course, taken exclusively from user activity, but those numbers were housed in the business table, so it didn't require any kind of joins to exterior tables except for the hours and categories table. But the category table would be pivotal in trying to link between 2 different things that we're going to be comparing and contrasting with other subcategories in this project. So I think it's important also to just highlight the fact that there are star ratings on Yelp, and these star ratings look just like this. It's just like I said a second ago. It's 1 out of 5, and it could be anything from 1.0 to 5.0. And so, for those purposes, I thought it would be helpful for us to create a system that makes it easier to talk about when we're profiling the data and trying to make sense of the data itself. So that's why I created this here, which is something I call star categories. And so basically it has a spread of stars, starts at 1.0 up to 1.9, and that's low. 2.0 to 2.9 is average. 3.0, 3.9 is high, and so on and so on. But the thing that's unique about this category chart, if you'll notice, there's only one specific star rating, average star rating, if you will, that would label a business as premium, and that's only if they achieve the maximum amount of stars available on the Yelp website. So that's good. That's going to be a huge way of us trying to just make sense of the data as we work through some of these questions. And speaking of those questions, let's go ahead and dive right into the 5 questions that we're going to be answering in this project. The first: is there a difference in distribution of hours for businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona specifically, compared to businesses that are underneath the soul food category in the categories table? The second: is there a difference in number of reviews for businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona compared to soul food? So we're going to be using those 2 comparisons quite a bit in this data set. Another that has to do with that same section: can anything be inferred from the location data provided between businesses in Scottsdale and the soul food businesses? And there will be an interesting thing to mention there. 4, what differences are there between open and closed businesses? And then lastly, number 5, what are the commonalities and anomalies between businesses clustered into star categories? And when we get to that point, we'll be focusing almost exclusively on 5.0 businesses, premium businesses. So with that said, let's go ahead and dig right into the very first question, and that is there a difference in distribution of hours for businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona compared to soul food businesses? What we did for Scottsdale, we sampled the top 3 businesses in terms of the average star rating for businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona. And those just happen to be Taliesin West, the Cider Mill, and Sent from Above. So what I've done here, I've just taken the information that was largely unorganized and organized into a table format, so for ease of use to understand. And this is the thought process behind this is the type of thing that you would see on a door. You know, if you were to walk up to one of these businesses and try to look at what their hours would be, so you would know when to come by. And so what a lot of what we did here was we looked at some of the comparisons and the things that are different across times, all of the opening times across all days except for Sent from Above, which were closed Sunday and Saturday. But all of these times centers solely upon having the same opening time, and weekends are really the only time of variability for most of these businesses. But let's go ahead and move on to soul food businesses, and this is why I went ahead and sampled such a small sample size for Scottsdale. Scottsdale, as we'll see in the next question, has a large footprint of data, but soul food only has 2 businesses, and so a lot of the challenge for this project was trying to take a smaller sample of data and compare it to a larger sample in the thousands of data for Scottsdale. If you notice, soul food, it's very similarly to Scottsdale, has a lot of the same opening times, and a lot of the variability comes on the weekends. Oinky's Pork Chop Heaven is a fantastic name, but it's open the same time every single day, which will have a comparison to one of the businesses, if you remember, in Scottsdale. And Charlie D's Catfish and Chicken has the same exact times Monday through Friday and on into Saturday, but Sunday is where hours shift. And so these had the smallest footprint or the smallest change across times compared to all the other businesses, which usually on Sundays had much more different times. But in summary, what we're seeing with this particular question, here's kind of a overview of an answer. Opening times showed the most consistency across all businesses analyzed, with closing times containing the most variability. Weekends, especially Sundays, showed the variability in opening times. In fact, the only variability in opening times. But 2 businesses did not even have weekly changes to their hours, and that were the businesses that we identified. This is the Cider Mill and Oinky's Pork Chop Heaven. So that's our answer to our first question. Let's move on, of course, into our second question. Is there a difference in number of reviews for businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona compared to soul food businesses? And so in order to answer this question, I think it's important for us to be looking at some visuals similar to the last one. That way we can get an understanding of just how many businesses, how many reviews are making up how these businesses score. Because it's not simply, I think it's very important to consider this, it's not simply thinking about how many businesses are within a certain star category. It's also important to think about how many reviews are placing a business into that star category. So this is not just premium reviews, 5.0 reviews. This is how many ratings, how many reviews that these businesses received in total. So this could be anything from a 1.0 to a 5.0. But the average of these businesses is calculated by placing the business within the bar charts. So I hope that makes sense. And if it doesn't, please tell me in the comments down below how I might improve this chart. But I think this chart is very helpful for us trying to understand a lot more about how businesses in Scottsdale fare when it comes to where they rate in this data set. There are no low rating businesses. There are no businesses that score from 1.0 to 1.9, which is very interesting. The most businesses, the average rating is in the top rated category, which, if you'll remember, is 3.0 to 3.9. High rated, of course, is 4.0 to 4.9, and premium rated is exclusively 5.0. There's a surprisingly large amount of premium rated businesses. I was very shocked by this. But the most rated, the businesses with the most amount of reviews, and I think it's because they have a higher amount of reviews, they fit within that larger sample size, and so that places them firmly within 4.0 to 4.9 is the high-rated businesses. The average rating of a Scottsdale business is 3.95, remarkably high, still within the top-rated category, which makes sense since it's the highest sample. With no low ratings, there's nothing to skew the data down towards lower ratings, so it makes sense that we would be firmly within shooting range, if you will, of being a high-rated business. And I thought it would be interesting to also make clear is this is a data set with 10,000 data points, and Scottsdale makes up 2% of that data set. And we'll get in more into the numbers comparing Soul Food to Scottsdale shortly. But let's move on into looking at the soul food category. So soul food, average soul food rating is 3.75, so still remarkably high, but not quite as high as Scottsdale. A grand total of 10 reviews. Now, I just want to remind you, if you take a calculation of all of these reviews, I mean, we're easily in the 17 to 18,000 number when it comes to reviews. Scottsdale, or Soul Food, 10 reviews. And so these businesses had scores of 4.5 and 3.0. And that gave them the average rating of 3.75. So I think a lot more important than just looking at these by themselves, I thought it would be even more important to look at trends as it relates to number of reviews to what their average rating actually is. So with that in mind, I created a line chart along with a lot of the data that I've been referencing so far. And this kind of gives us an idea of the trends associated with Scottsdale compared to Soul Food. And I would say, while Scottsdale does trend in a direction that leads more to higher number of reviews contributing to their rating, it's much flatter for Soul Food, which probably indicates a lot more about how the number of reviews doesn't really affect the rating of the businesses for Soul Food. And that's mostly because there's such a smaller amount of data. I mean, just look at these numbers. The number of rated businesses in Scottsdale total, there's 497. We're comparing 497 businesses to 2 businesses in the Soul Food category. There are 20,614 ratings total in Scottsdale compared to 10. And of course, this will affect the average rating quite a bit with such difference in sample size. And you might be thinking, why compare these two categories? And that's because, well, in the real world, there are lots of instances where we face much larger sets of data that we have to compare and get trend data to smaller data sets. And that's much harder to do. And that's why I really wanted to try to focus in on these two different types of data. With that explanation, I'd like us to go ahead and get into the answer that I came up with to this question, which is, despite the vast differences in the number of businesses and number of reviews across both variables, Scottsdale, Arizona, and Soul Food, there was in fact a relational trend between the number of reviews and the number of businesses. It did go up and to the right, and so there was a positive trend for both of them. Although it didn't necessarily align perfectly, it did align, and there was a positive trend. And then let's move on into question number 3, and this one's a relatively quick question because it's all pretty self-explanatory once you get a hold of the map that I've created. But the question is, can anything be inferred from the location data provided by businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona, and soul food businesses? And when you take a look at this map, you will see that, shockingly, despite the small number of data points, of course, all, and I do mean all, of the businesses in Scottsdale, Arizona, of course, are in the state of Arizona. I know that might be shocking to some of you, but soul food, there were only 2 businesses, and of all the places within the 50 U.S. states that one of the 2 businesses could have resided in. One, of course, was up in northern Ohio, close to the Great Lakes, and the other was in Phoenix, or specifically North Randall, which I believe is a neighborhood of Phoenix. And so with that in mind, I found it quite fascinating that there was something that could be inferred, because initially when I answered this question, I said, no, there's nothing to be inferred. There's only two businesses within the soul food category. But then I dug into it more, and I found that they were actually in the same state. And truly not that far from each other relative to the other soul food businesses. So I thought this map really represents how interesting it can be when you have a hunch and you want to go ahead and visualize it. So the answer, of course, location data from the sample showed an alignment in state for one of the 2 soul food businesses. And that exclamation point is really big because I got so excited when I saw that. And I was like, wow, that's spectacular. But let's go ahead and move on into the 4th question, which is, what differences are there between open and closed businesses? Now, one of the things that you can look at within the business table is you can check and see which businesses are open, which businesses are closed. And I found it very interesting to dig into that. I actually spent more time digging into that than any of the other. But I had to come back and answer this question, which is, what exactly are the differences between open and closed businesses? But if you want to get a look at some of the digging that I did into open and closed businesses and look at some of the SQL queries, I recommend you check out my GitHub, which of course will be linked below. Links to that will include SQL queries for all of these questions that I've visualized in this presentation, and it's hopefully that'll be helpful, or you'll find that insightful as well. Let's dive into this question. So, number of open businesses, it took up the largest portion, which was 84.8% of all businesses in the entire data set were open, which I guess isn't too surprising. I mean, there's not that many businesses that would be closed that would have active users posting about them. And closed businesses took up 15.2%. And the number of reviews for businesses, and this I've actually found somewhat surprising, because my initial hypothesis was the number of reviews, there'll be a lot of negative reviews for these closed businesses. And not only that, but my initial thought was there'll be a correlation, let's say, between the number of negative reviews and closed businesses. Well, we'll find out rather quickly that that's not necessarily the case. And there also, I think, is another very interesting phenomenon that you're probably familiar with, and we'll dig into that in just a little bit. But very, very, very much not what I thought my hypothesis was going to indicate, but interesting and intriguing all the same. And then moving on into kind of trends with open and closed businesses. So again, this is the same type of graph. It's read the exact same way. It's just instead of Scottsdale and soul food, we're looking at open and closed. And closed is represented by the mint line, and the dark blue is the open. And so you'll notice, especially since there's much less, they kind of take the place of soul food and Scottsdale. And these are just some of the numbers over here as well. I mean, we're dealing with much more reviews for open businesses and much less for closed businesses across count and review. But I want to get into that phenomenon that I started to talk about earlier in this presentation, and that is I want to appeal to an experience that anyone who's been online and done some online shopping has experienced. So let's just imagine with me for a moment that you're on your phone and you decide to open up the Amazon app. You start to look for a product, and you're probably familiar with this screen here where it says customer reviews right here above my head. The more reviews that an item has, the more likely you are to feel much better about the data not being as skewed one way or another. And in this case, 38 reviews, you have to weigh as a consumer if that's something that you want to purchase, because 87 reviews are 5-star. 87% of these reviews are 5 stars, but there's not a lot of reviews. And I thought this was very interesting because it's almost like most consumers these days online they are data analysts. You analyze the data when you go to Amazon. And here's a great example. Here's 2 books that I would love to purchase that I think are probably going to be excellent reads. The first is The Wager by good old David Grann, the writer of Killers of the Flower Moon, an excellent book. I can't recommend that enough. It's wonderful. But he goes on to have 1,341 ratings at a 4.5 rating on Amazon. And we compare that to the 1998 Yankees, The Inside Story of the Greatest Baseball Team Ever by Jack Curry, 6 ratings at a 4.4. Now, it's not to say this book isn't going to be good or that this book is going to be better, but I think most would agree with me that more ratings for an Amazon review, for any type of review online, is an indication of a much more accurate reading of a star rating. And this is because it's a larger pool of data that you're able to make a much more informed decision. And on top of the fact that as a consumer, there's lots of different types of opinions out there. And so when you have a larger group of people, there's a much better chance that there's at least on the spectrum of people who are most aligned with your buying choices when it comes to price, when it comes to value, when it comes to an experience. It's a much better chance that with more people involved in the reviewing process, that there'll be people who align with your values when it comes to how you value the item or what you would purchase as a consumer. And so with that in mind, I think that really colors how we should view this data set. It tells us something very important, that these particular aspects of the data have so much smaller sample sizes, and that will become especially apparent in our final question. But to answer question number 4, let's just go ahead and get to the synopsis of question number 4, and that is there are 2 major differences between open and closed businesses. And the first is there are much more open businesses with reviews compared to closed businesses with reviews, and those same open businesses had a higher average star review than closed businesses. But I do want to highlight that a larger data set doesn't always correlate perfectly with a higher average star rating. But in fact, it makes it less attainable for it to get a higher average star rating. But the smaller the sample size, the less likely, the less data that we have access to. So let's move on to our final question, question number 5, which is, what are the commonalities and anomalies between businesses clustered into star categories? And again, we're going to focus specifically onto premium rated businesses in the 5.0 category. So these are the top 10 most reviewed businesses, and also the line here is going to show the average star rating for those businesses. And so the most reviewed business has darn near 4,000 reviews with an average star rating of around 3.6. And you'll notice that none of these breach into the premium business category. All of them stay firmly into either the high-rated business or the top-rated business category in the 3.0 to 3.9 and 4.0 to 4.9. You'll notice also in this donut chart as well, there are less than 10,000 reviews in the 0.1% for the entire data set. Less than 10 reviews, that's 47.1%. What a wild change between businesses that have more than 10,000 reviews and businesses that have less than 10 reviews. And then somewhere between 1,000 and 10 sits over half of the businesses that are in the entire data set. And I think this really visualizes quite well exactly the problem that I highlighted with my Amazon example, and that is we're not dealing with a lot of reviews for the vast majority of businesses. In fact, it's an outlier. No businesses within the top 10 most reviewed on Yelp had anything above a 4.5 or lower rating than 2.5. So there's a narrow gap for what this data set has based off of what users have given up about businesses. And again, it doesn't align with the hypothesis that I had, that there were going to be more businesses that would be closed and more businesses that would have much more negative reviews, and that was going to vastly overshadow the number of reviews. I do want to highlight one thing, and this is where things really start to get very interesting. This is the thing I was mentioning during the Amazon section, and that is, I just want to notice how many businesses have less than 10 reviews. 4,148 of the businesses within this data set have less than 10 reviews. So basically how I created this graph was I took the the first 10 businesses of the 4,148 reviews, or 148 businesses within the data set that fit within the constraint. You can see the SQL query if you check out my GitHub. That fit within the constraint of it's a business that has less than 10 reviews, or actually it looks like it's less than 50 reviews if you look exclusively at this chart. You'll notice that most of these businesses have, 47 reviews is not a lot of reviews for a business. 4 reviews especially, there's a vast majority of these that have below 5, at 5 or below 5. So what is taking place with these businesses? And I think that's where we get into this situation where you might have had a family member or a close friend who has business acumen that goes far beyond what you could even explain in a review, and you trust them. You trust them to have a successful business. They start a business, and then like many who start businesses, they run into hard times. The sales don't turn over like they thought they would. For one reason or another, they have to close down. They have to close their doors. And when they do so, the vast majority of Yelp reviews have come from their family and friends. Have come from 1 or 2 people that they've asked to review them on Yelp. And even if it wasn't family and friends or 1 or 2 people that they've asked to review on Yelp, if it was just a stranger off the street, I question how many people truly go out of their way for most of these businesses to add a review on the Yelp website, on the Yelp platform. And so to these businesses that we saw in the first graph, especially the one entitled The Buffet that has the most reviews, I wonder, you might have been to a place like this. I have. I went to an Outback Steakhouse one time, it was excellent food. The wait staff were wonderful. The hostess was very kind. And at the end of the meal, they handed me a card and they said, "Hey, please scan this QR code and review us on Yelp, and we would really appreciate it." And I think they gave us something like a free set of rolls or something like that for your next trip or something like that. And when I noticed that, it gave me pause, because that happened while I was reviewing this data, and I thought, maybe that's how a place like The Buffet reached their 4,000 reviews. It's because they went out of their way to make it a prime objective for the business's success to achieve a higher sample size on Yelp to hopefully boost the average star rating for their business. And of course, that's first and foremost, that comes from quality of service and quality of food or what have you for the business. But it also comes from the business diligently reminding, maybe not asking or demanding or requiring, but reminding consumers to use Yelp as a way of talking about their experience and being able to show strangers who have never been to that specific location, hey, this is an excellent business. They do great work. I recommend it. But for the situation here, where we have not so many reviews, it's obviously not an indication of if the business is open or closed, as we saw with the vast majority of businesses in the data set. being businesses that were open and not closed. So strike that. That can't be part of the situation. But it may not be a main objective for these businesses. These businesses may not be looking at their Yelp score as the most important aspect of their success in the marketplace. Instead, they might be focusing specifically on quality. They think the quality will speak for itself, the quality in staff, the quality and the experience for the consumer, the quality in the product. It's not a bad way of going about it. But it's an important aspect when we're analyzing this data of asking, why do businesses have these lower numbers? And I think it's simply that. I think it's that businesses don't their main objective isn't to have the most pristine rating upon a business review website that sometimes can take on some pretty angry reviews. So with that in mind, this has been the work that I have done on my data science project from the work that I did for data science, or SQL for data science, on Coursera with UC Davis, and I hope that you've enjoyed this project. If you have enjoyed this project, I definitely recommend that you take a look at my socials, my LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Titus L. Custer. My GitHub is the same, github.com/Titus L. Custer. And then my YouTube, you can also search Titus L. or Lynn Custer, but my official title is here, Titus Lynn Custer 8092. And of course, this is located on that very YouTube channel. So go ahead and check out some of my other videos, and I hope to connect with you down in the comments or via direct message on LinkedIn. And I want to say thank you so very much for taking 30 minutes to talk with me about my data science project. And I'd love to keep the conversation going. I'd love some feedback. I'd love your thoughts about the data set. I'd love your thoughts about how I might be able to improve my analysis, or definitely my SQL queries. So check out my GitHub to give those queries a look, and I'd love to connect with you. Thank you so very much, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.